Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center For Audit Quality, Spencer Stewart, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member, along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Diligence Boardroom Resources and the co-founder and editor-at-large of Corporate Board Member Magazine, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Today we're going to be talking about the Audit Committee Transparency Barometer, evaluating key Audit Committee disclosures. And joining me is somebody that I've known for a long time, but it is her first opportunity to be on the show, which is my pleasure. I'd like to introduce Erin Dwyer, who's the Managing Director of Stakeholder Engagement and Communications for the Center For Audit Quality, otherwise affectionately known as CAQ. Welcome, Erin.
Thanks for having me, TK.
So this barometer is nothing new. We've actually had people on the show before talking about it, and we want to, but there's a lot of our audience that probably is not familiar with it, and we want to make sure that they don't think it's about the weather, okay? So why don't you use a little time and educate our viewers on what the Transparency Barometer is.
Sure, it is not about the weather, you are correct, although it's a rainy day in New York. What the barometer is, though, is an analysis of the Audit Committee reporting of the S&P 1500 companies. So before we go into the details of sort of the data that we collect, let me back up a little bit and talk to you about how the barometer started. In 2013, the CAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, was looking at the terrific work audit committees were doing in terms of oversight of the financial reporting process and investor protections. But we were seeing that they weren't really disclosing a lot around the work that we were doing. So together with some of our governance organization partners, including the National Association for Corporate Directors and the New York Stock Exchange Governance Center, of which you were a part at the time, we issued a call to action, encouraging audit committees to really sort of pull back the curtain, if you will, on the important work that they were doing and provide additional disclosure and information to investors and other stakeholders so they could see the work that audit committees are doing. To that end, now we, in 2014, thought if we've asked them to provide more information, we really need to be tracking it. So in conjunction with our partner Audit Analytics, we started benchmarking, as I mentioned, the S&P 1500 Audit Committee disclosures. So what do we look at? We look at four kind of overarching categories. The first is audit firm evaluation, audit firm selection, audit firm compensation, and finally audit partner rotation. And within each of those larger categories, we then sort of look at some subcategories that we track. In addition to those data points, we provide examples from the most recent proxy season of what we sort of view as leading practices and disclosures. So if audit committees want to up their game, if you will, and improve their disclosures, we provide some examples of what other companies in the S&P 1500 are doing that we think is a model or an example of good disclosures. And so we now have 5 years under our belt.
Which is a great segue. So 5 years in and adding this year. So what have we learned so far?
So we've learned a lot, but the highlight, I think, is that audit committees have voluntarily disclosed year over year significantly more information, almost across the board in all categories that we track. Now, before I go into the data points, what I think is important in terms of what I just said is voluntary. When the CAQ issued this call to action with our partners in 2013, we weren't regulators, we weren't standard setters, so this was really something that was not a mandate. It was going to need to be market driven, and audit committees have responded. And, you know, I think they deserve a lot of credit. I also think, as your viewers have probably are aware of, institutional investors also deserve a lot of credit. Over the last several years, Investors have been more articulate and explicit via investment stewardship principles and proxy voting guidelines in terms of the information that they want to see from boards of directors generally, but also specifically from audit committees. And BlackRock, for instance, specifically calls out that it looks to the audit committee's report for insight into the scope of the audit committee's responsibilities, including an overview of its processes and issues on its agenda. So I think investors have let directors and audit committees specifically know that they're interested in understanding how they're executing their oversight roles, and audit committees have really responded. So what does that look like? This year in our barometer, 46% of S&P 500 companies disclose that there is a discussion around the criteria considered when they evaluate the audit firm. So 46% this year, which is up from 8% in 2014, a very large jump. 26% of S&P companies disclose that the evaluation of the external auditor is at least an annual event, up from 4% in 2014. And the final number I want to highlight, because I think it was a hot topic at several annual meetings this year, is reporting on audit firm tenure. 70% of S&P 500 companies this year disclose the length that their audit firm has been engaged. So really, headline is, in our view, these double-digit increases virtually across the board are really a success, and audit committees are disclosing more information so investors and other stakeholders can understand how they're executing their oversight responsibilities.
So you have to be happy about the growing numbers, and the numbers are impressive in their own right, but it's not 100%.
It is not 100%.
So I'm sure that that's your goal, so I take it there's more for you to do.
There is, and we joke at the CAQ we'll continue to do the barometer until every number is 100%, which I think means it lives long past my working career. But the public company audit profession has a mantra of continual improvement, and we think that applies also to audit committee reports. We want to see continual improvement, and we have. There is still a long ways to go in several of the areas. And if we look back at one of the data points I mentioned, specifically that 26% of S&P 500 companies are disclosing that the evaluation of the external auditor is at least an annual event. When we speak with audit committees, anecdotally, almost all of them that we speak to are doing annual external auditor evaluations. So why aren't they disclosing it? They're doing it. And it reminds me of the old adage, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. So the audit committee equivalent, right, is if the audit committee does an external evaluation and they don't disclose it, did it happen? Of course it happened. But I think there is, it's a value in reporting to investors. Yes, we did this. Yes, we're taking our oversight duties and responsibilities seriously, and we want to report out to you that we've done this. Even if they know that they're doing it and that investors expect them to do it, we think there's no harm then in reminding them, yes, we fulfilled our duty. So we hope to see that number go up.
So I obviously have worked with the CAQ for a long time, and I know that you guys spend a lot of time talking to both investors and audit committees. So what's your sense, and particularly after this barometer results being in, what's your sense on how these two groups are interacting?
So I think, TK, most of your viewers would probably agree that director-investor engagement is at an all-time high. But I don't think this is the case for audit committees. I don't think they get asked very frequently, if at all, from most of them that we speak with, to engage with investors. Now, I don't think they're sitting home feeling envious of the lead director or the comp committee chair that they're getting, called into these meetings by large institutional investors. But I think they recognize that it's worthwhile for them to engage with investors, and vice versa. The investors we speak to feel like audit committee members have really valuable perspectives on the companies, on the boards of which they serve. So they want to engage, and the CAQ has done various things to try to bring these two groups together, since we haven't seen the one-on-one engagements with investors and audit committees happening as often. Just a few weeks ago, we hosted a roundtable with large US-based asset managers and audit committee chairs. and they really enjoyed the time together. And I think one of the most interesting things that came out of that conversation is that, for the most part, what the asset managers wanted to talk to the audit committees about was their role in risk oversight outside of the financial statement reporting. And in a year where the headlines have been largely around Me Too and other maybe cultural failings at some companies, that was a hot topic, if you will, how audit committees are overseeing a culture, what their risk oversight role is in cyber, of course, how they're looking at business continuity. So the investors were really interested in sort of hearing from the audit committees what their role is in the risk oversight that may not be in financial statements, and just generally how they're approaching enterprise risk management. And the second point I would make, in addition to institutional investors, is that retail investors, through a survey that the CAQ conducts every year, the annual Main Street Investment Survey, which was released in September, rank audit committees the second highest entity which they believe are looking out for investor protections. So number one is the independent external auditor at 81%, and just right behind that are independent audit committees, with 80% of retail investors stating that they feel they are looking out for their best interests. So I think you see both on the institutional side and the retail side, investors looking to audit committees to really stand in their shoes, if you will, and oversee the financial reporting process as well as other risks on their behalf.
So history shows that 5 years ago, we were pushing everybody to engage with shareholders. Collectively, we all did a pretty good job, because now there's so many people requesting visits that the institutional shareholders have to say that they can't visit everybody.
Yeah.
But they still want to visit things that they're concerned about, the institutional shareholders. So I think it's a real coup for audit committees to be left out. I mean, there's a sense of confidence that they know, they have their arms around this, they have a process, and this is working well. So when we go back to the Sarbanes-Oxley days and look at where they were in the crosshairs, okay? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the best compliment you could have that they don't want to talk to audit committees.
I think that's right. And to be clear, it doesn't never happen, right? Because if there is an issue, investors certainly do call the audit committee. But I do think that's exactly right. It's not happening that frequently. A lot of the audit committees members we speak with have never been asked to engage with investors, outside of seeing them at conferences or other governance events. So I think you're right. It's not being invited to the party in this instance is a very good place to be.
Yeah. Well, Erin, thank you for taking the time to come up, where we always try and cover every year the results of the barometer, and this just keeps getting better. So thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms, brought to you with knowledge partners Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, Spencer Stewart, the Conference Board, and corporate board members, along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.